All right, let's jump right in. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like if your body's fight or flight alarm just got stuck? I mean, permanently in the on position, going off completely at random? Well, today, we're diving into a medical detective story to unmask the tiny rogue agent that's responsible for exactly that kind of chaos. So, here's how our investigation is going to go. First up, we're going to identify the culprit, this rogue hormone factory. Then, we'll sift through the clues it leaves behind at the scene. After that, we'll see how doctors crack the case, plan a pretty high-stakes takedown, and finally, we'll look at the case file for the big takeaways. Okay, let's get right into it. Time to identify our perpetrator. And trust me, this thing is a master of disguise, hiding out in the shadows of our own bodies. Seriously, just think about this for a second. You know that jolt of adrenaline you feel when you're stressed or scared? That whole fight or flight thing? Now, what if that switch never turned off? What if it could just flip on randomly, flooding your entire system with panic signals when there's absolutely no danger? Well, that is exactly what we're talking about here. Okay, so our culprit has a name, and it is a bit of a mouthful, Pheochromocytoma. But don't let the name intimidate you. The idea is actually pretty simple. It's a tumor that grows on the very cells that are supposed to make adrenaline-like hormones. The big problem? This tumor plays by its own rules. It doesn't listen to any of the body's instructions. Yeah, a really good way to think about it is like a hormone factory that's just gone completely haywire. It's totally off script, ignoring all the memos from headquarters and just dumping these huge, unregulated batches of adrenaline into your system. Pretty much whenever it feels like it. So, where is this rogue factory hiding? Well, about 90% of the time, its home base is the adrenal glands, those little glands that sit right on top of your kidneys. But, and this is where it gets tricky, in about 10% of cases, these things can pop up somewhere else entirely, along the body's nerve pathways. You know, any factory that's operating in secret, especially a rogue one, is bound to leave some clues behind. And in this case, the crime scene is the person's own body. The evidence? A really chaotic storm of symptoms. And I've got to be clear, we are not talking about a little discomfort. The classic signs are, well, they're dramatic. We're talking sudden, pounding headaches, a hurt that feels like it's going to beat right out of your chest, just heavy, drenching sweats, and these scary, dangerous spikes in blood pressure. And then there's this really terrifying psychological piece. Many people describe this overwhelming, unexplainable feeling that something terrible is about to happen, a sense of impending doom. Now, here's what makes this thing so incredibly hard to diagnose. These attacks, which doctors call paroxysms, they don't happen all the time. They can be set off by the most normal, everyday things, like just standing up too fast or bending over, or even just a moment of stress. It's this total unpredictability that turns it into such a tough medical mystery to solve. So with all these confusing, random clues, how in the world do doctors finally crack the case? Well, it takes a really methodical, almost forensic investigation to go from just a suspicion to a solid confirmation. The whole process really works like a funnel. You start wide, with a doctor who's smart enough to suspect something is up based on those wild on and off symptoms. Then you narrow it down. The next step is to look for the evidence, the hormonal fingerprints, using some very specific lab tests. And once you've got those fingerprints, it's time to bring in the big guns, the imaging scans, to find exactly where this thing is hiding. And this forensic work is just incredibly precise. The absolute gold standard test looks for something in the blood called plasma-free metanephrines. Here's why that's so clever. The adrenaline-like hormones get released in these big bursts, right? But these metanephrines, which are what's left over after the body breaks them down, stay elevated all the time. That gives the tumor away with up to 99% accuracy. It is, without a doubt, the smoking gun. You know, this really shows you how far medicine has come. Back in the day, doctors might have tried these so-called provocative tests to actually try to trigger an attack just to see what would happen. Today, the guidance is crystal clear. Those tests are incredibly hazardous and should absolutely not be used. There's just no need, not when we have such accurate and safe lab tests. Okay, so the lab results are in, and they confirm we've got a rogue factory on our hands. The final step of the investigation is basically a manhunt, or a tumor hunt. This is where doctors bring in the imaging technology, like CT or MRI scans, to get eyes on the target. Finding its exact hideout is absolutely critical for what comes next. All right, we've identified the culprit, we know where it is. Now it's time for the takedown. But this isn't a SWAT raid. It's an incredibly delicate, high-stakes operation. Just rushing in could be a total disaster. The end goal, of course, is to get that tumor out with surgery. But, and this is a huge but, there's a catch. Just touching or moving this tumor during an operation can make it dump a massive, even fatal dose of adrenaline into the body. So before anyone even thinks about scheduling surgery, the patient has to be very, very carefully prepared to make sure that doesn't happen. And this brings us to what is basically the golden rule of treating this condition. Alpha blockers first. Always. Think of it like this. The alpha blockers put up a protective shield around your blood vessels. Then, once that shield is firmly in place, you can bring in the beta blockers to help slow down the heart rate. If you get that order wrong, if you use beta blockers alone, you leave the blood vessels wide open and unprotected. That can cause a massive, catastrophic spike in blood pressure. It's a rule you just can't break. So the whole pre-op plan is orchestrated with military precision. Step 1, start the alpha blockers. Step 2, add in the beta blockers. Step 3, a stabilization period, usually about 10 to 14 days, to just let the body and the cardiovascular system calm down and reset. And only then, when everything is safe and stable, can the surgeons go in, often with minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery, and finally remove the tumor. But, the story doesn't just end when the surgery is over. The final piece of our investigation is to look at the bigger picture, the long-term implications. What are the key takeaways from this entire case file? One of the biggest things to think about is whether the tumor is cancerous. Now, for the ones found in the adrenal glands, thankfully, less than 10% are malignant. But remember those other tumors, the ones that show up elsewhere? That number jumps all the way to 30%. And that is why lifelong follow-up is so, so important. Okay, and get ready for this next number because it has completely changed how doctors approach this whole condition. We now believe that nearly half of all cases are connected to inherited genetic mutations. Think about that. This isn't just some random, unlucky event for a lot of people. It's literally written in their DNA. And that's exactly why genetic testing is now a standard part of the playbook. It's not just about the patient either. It helps doctors check for other related syndromes. It tells them how to best follow the patient for the rest of their life. And maybe most importantly, it helps identify other family members who might be at risk, who can then get screened, potentially catching a problem before it even starts. So when you look at the whole picture, this wild medical mystery is about so much more than just a rare tumor. It's this incredible, powerful reminder of the delicate, intricate chemical balance that keeps our bodies running every single second. It just goes to show how one tiny, rogue element can completely hijack our most basic survival systems. And it really leaves you with a final thought, doesn't it? What does this teach us about that beautiful but also fragile balance that keeps us all healthy?